So I don't know if you can tell, that's my old signature and that says 2018. And this was the first oil painting I ever did. Since 2018, I've almost exclusively used oil paint. But there's a reality to painting with oil paint, and it's that you need to use these: a thinner, medium, brush cleaner, and varnish. And all of these have one thing in common: they can kill you. But over the course of 5 years, through some different methods and products, I've slowly eliminated nearly all the harmful products associated with oil painting. Nearly all. Now, since I don't have a well-ventilated studio, I can't varnish inside. So I've been stuck using this since 2018. And don't get me wrong, it works fantastic, but I can't have these fumes going through my house. So I've come up with a sort of solution. I constructed this outdoor varnish booth where I can varnish all my paintings and leave them out to dry. But there's one problem.
The top story is this weather bomb that's going to hit Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada.
Much of central and eastern Canada is in the grips of a polar vortex right now.
Extreme colds, this is what we're talking about. So minus 40s, minus 30s to minus 40.
When it's this cold, exposed skin can freeze in 10 to 30 minutes, so watch the temperature.
Due to the extreme colds of winter, it brings a reality to varnishing in the cold. Uneven application, slower drying, cloudiness, brush marks, bubbles, cracking, discoloration, adhesion issues, and difficulty removing varnish, to name a few. And just as I'm getting ready to deal with another long, cold winter up here in Canada, I heard of an acrylic paint that was very similar to oil paint, and I went and bought some. It's not this though. Open acrylics lend themselves to both layering and blending in some ways that are reminiscent of oils. Unlike traditional acrylics, open acrylics undergo an extended period without skinning over that allows its tactile qualities to pass through distinct stages. While this is something that oil painters have long enjoyed, acrylic painters will find this a unique and wonderful opportunity to further control the textures and effects one can employ. Now, this isn't just some review. This is the product description from the Golden website. So I know you're probably wondering, like, what on earth do acrylic paints have to do with varnish? Let me show you. The main difference between acrylics and oil is that acrylics are water-based and oils are, well, oil-based. And this base affects the varnishes you can use. Oils, for the most part, use solvent-based varnishes, whereas acrylics can use both water-based and solvent-based. Now here's the kicker. Water-based varnishes are non-toxic, whereas we already know solvent-based varnishes can kill you. So ultimately, if this acrylic paint works, I can finally get rid of my last toxic chemical and go completely non-toxic. So let's test out this new paint. In order to truly see if this is a product I can replace my oil paints with, I want to attempt a painting in the same way I would oils. And I start with a charcoal sketch and an acrylic underpainting. A method I've been using for many years now with my oil paintings is to start with an acrylic underpainting. This was initially a workaround to the harmful thinners used in traditional painting, but later became a huge aspect to my paintings as it added a much needed depth. What this underpainting layer does is establish the structure of the painting as well as the values. Part of this underpainting will show through in the final image, which not only adds depth, but will also create a lot of interest and variation to otherwise, quote, boring areas. Now to my first experience with the open acrylics. I'll be using a traditional palette, of which I'll link in the description, and I'll be mixing the Ultramarine Blue and Alizarin Crimson to create my black. Part of my process is to pre-mix my palette. I focus on the main color groups of the painting and organize my palette from dark to light for each color group. Now, aside from my horrible camera angle and my hand blocking the majority of the mixing process, my first reaction is to how wet and runny this paint is. You can tell it truly has a high pigment ratio for how vibrant the colors are, but is definitely a lot more runnier than oil paint. It resembles more of an oil paint mixed with a medium or thinner than oil paint right out of the tube. For my first reactions using this oil paint, I'll leave it to the live commentary. Ooh, very thin. If you couldn't tell from my initial reaction to this paint, it was actually quite a surprise, both unpleasant and some optimism. It is definitely a paint that is significantly thinner than traditional oil paint, to the point where although it stays, quote, workable longer than traditional acrylics, it doesn't seem to have remotely the same robustness of oils. Although the robustness is kind of hard to explain, I'll do my best. Oils have this trait to them where they have great coverage and this ability to mix and blend on your canvas without a lot of pickup. With these acrylic opens, although they stay workable for longer, your second, third, and fourth pass with the brush seems to pick up the majority of the paint and leave a fraction of the pigment left. What I shortly realized though is that this paint resembles a glaze, much more than oil paint out of the tube. So I decided to approach this painting differently, and instead of hoping to achieve the same coverage I would get with oils, I started to use acrylic open strength, which was glazing. I was going to have to do many more layers, but I believe at this point, using this paint strength was the only way to save this painting. Now, I do have to admit, I did have to mix some normal acrylics in for some of the blacks, as my ultramarine and crimson mix was simply too thin and not cutting it. Maybe ivory black from acrylic open would have been a better solution, but for the time being, standard acrylics were working for the opaque blacks. One thing I was really not planning on was how impactful the underpainting would be in this piece. It has been an important part of my painting process for many years, but with oils, I was covering up roughly 80 to 90% of it. With these acrylic opens, although I was slowly building up the layers for coverage, more like 50% of the underpainting was showing through. Thankfully, I took a little bit of extra time with this underpainting, as I would have been doing a lot of band-aid work at this point in the process. But as these layers started to form, this paint really started to come into its own. The layers, in addition with the pigment strength of these acrylic paints, started to really establish a solid piece, and I could truly start to appreciate this paint. As I moved to the lights of this paint, I really appreciated the balance of transparency and opaqueness of the white. It was very similar to an oil paint zinc white, and of all the paints I used, the titanium white open acrylic was the closest resemblance to oils. Sort of bittersweetly and probably to be expected, as I started getting towards the end of this piece, I really started to get more and more comfortable with these acrylic opens. Thankfully, it came at a good time as I was able to apply my understanding of this paint to the final details of this painting. And with those final brush strokes, the painting is finished. And here we are with the final piece. Even though the open acrylics gave me a lot of challenges initially, I'm really happy with the final product and how it all turned out. And if you like this painting, you can get your very own print at lukedurden.com/prints. I'll leave a link in the description of this video so you can get your very own. And continue watching to the end of this video for a little bit of bonus content. Thanks again for watching. So this was supposed to be the part of the video where I show you me varnishing the painting and this whole thing comes full circle, but two small oversights happened. Firstly, I didn't realize that these paints need 30 days to dry before you can varnish. And at this point in the video, this painting's only been dry for about a week and a half, and I'm already a week late posting this video, so there's that. But secondly, and most importantly, I found this. This is an order confirmation for a oil painting varnish that's non-toxic, non-flammable, and is virtually safe for humans. Now, believe me when I say I've scoured the internet, went on forums, talked to other professionals to try and solve this problem, and all of it to no avail. But in researching for water-based varnishes for acrylic paints, I came across water-based oil paint, which I knew about before, but what I didn't know is that they have mediums, and more importantly, they have a varnish that's virtually safe for humans. So, yeah. Now what I find hilarious is that in researching for water-based varnishes for these paints, I would have never stumbled across this. Just had to do with how I was searching. So even though I'll probably never use these again, they inadvertently helped me solve my problem. So lesson learned, don't be afraid to try new things because you never know what you'll find. I'm just kidding. This stuff's expensive.